Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for this day. Thank you for all of us being here together for this workshop. And thank you for Ben for taking his time out to teach and do a workshop. It is such a blessing. And as we move through this workshop, just may your spirit move so we may all grow in your beloved name of Jesus and all that is good, just, and right. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks everybody for joining for this 3-hour workshop.
Did you say 3 hours?
And
Well,
that was a
it's
check.
been nice to see you, Ben, but
That was a check to see if you were really listening or
I'm
not.
paying attention.
And you were,
Yes.
Janet.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
yes.
So I think we have, we originally 90 minutes, so we've used a few of those, but I wanted to tell you about what my hope for this time together is. Number one, I'm hoping that we can all hear from each other. I'm believing that there's no experts on this call, but there are people with experience on this call, and that will be what we will try to share is our experience, our practice in this field, visitation ministries and pastoral care. So because our time is limited, as we have some open sharing times, I'm going to try to be a benevolent monitor. That is, I'll try to give you a wave or a flag or something that says, all right, thank you so much for sharing. Let's leave time for somebody else to share so that there is time for us to get as much as we're able to get in. The other thing that I want to share with you is a 7-page reflection paper. No, you're not going to see it, but I will send it to you afterward if you want it. And I'm only going to share the highlights of that. But this is a reflection paper that I wrote for the Pacific Southwest region boundary training to help that move forward. And it was for CEUs. And I was so intrigued with the idea of doing it that it took me forward to do some deep reflection on my own and then to gather some other people together. So that's kind of a basis of what I'm hoping for. And to get us into this just a little bit, I wonder if in 1 minute, now, did you all hear that? In 1 minute, you could share why you signed up for this workshop. And I'm going to call on somebody first, and then after they finish in how long? 1 minute.
1 minute.
They will invite somebody else to join, and then whoever is next will invite somebody else to join, and then that will take us through. So Leon, you were the first person that I saw when we opened Zoom. So could you share why you decided to do this workshop?
In 1 minute is very easy. I signed up for this workshop because it gave me the opportunity to connect with you, and I'm glad that has this opportunity to do that. So, and I'll turn it over to Larry.
Well, I joined this workshop for a couple of reasons. One is I needed some CEUs. 2, Ben was leading it. And 3, I'm kind of wondering if the way I've been doing pastoral care is the way other ministers have been doing pastoral care, because I really haven't talked with people very much about that through all these years ministry. And even though I'm retired, I continue to do pastoral care in different settings, like at camp, and I do occasionally get called to the hospital to see someone, and involved with Live on Purpose Community Church over in Vacaville. So I need something like this.
Mhm.
Larry invites somebody.
I'm supposed to, Carol.
Okay. I signed up for a couple of reasons. I spent most of my career working as a college professor, and only 5 years ago changed over to being a local church pastor, which was long after my seminary education. So I always feel like I am improvising when I do pastoral care or when I visit someone, whether it's at their home or the hospital or whatever. So I just wanted to hear how other people improvise, because I'm sure we all do that. And also, Ben, I just remember, I don't know, 20 or 25 years ago, a long time ago, when I'm a UCC minister, and when you spoke to our annual gathering, and I just remember really enjoying what you had to say. So I thought, well, this is a good chance.
Mhm.
Oh, I need to
Yeah.
choose somebody. Chad.
Well, like Larry, I need CEUs. I definitely wanted to join because Ben is teaching this. I think it also kind of like what Larry was saying, I have the way that I have learned and been taught. But I kind of want other examples from other ministers, just to add more tools to my toolbox. So yeah, I will choose, Janet.
Thank you, Chad. So, it's been stated, so I won't state again that I didn't even look at what the topic was. I just saw Ben's name and I just signed up. I had no idea what the topic was. But when I did look at the topic, I am grateful for the reminder, the image of pastoral care for me. When you throw in the stone in the lake and the ripples continue on, we never quite know what just a small thing can do in our lives. And certainly Ben has done that for us in so many ways. So I'm grateful for his ripple effect in my family's life, but I'm also a reminder of the significance of the things that I can do to bring that ripple effect.
And Janet?
Yes, Ellie.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Well, I ditto what everybody says about whatever Ben's teaching. I'd love to be. I've not been to seminary and I'm not an ordained minister, but I'm director of senior ministry at our church. And so I do a lot of visiting, and I'm always open to learning new things so that I can do that better. Monica.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm here for all the above. Everything's been said. CU, learning how to do different visitations, different ministry. Well, also give me a chance to see Ben. So I could write a whole book on that. Anyway, yeah. So glad I'm here. Glad we're all here. And there will be an evaluation after this. So, yes. Anyway, that's it for me. And Eva.
If she can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yay, hooray.
I finally got it all working. Thank you. Well, I'm probably the only one here then that's going to say I have not a clue who Ben is.
God bless you. God bless you.
But in reading the write-up on this and everything, again, like some of the others have alluded, is that my experiences with CPE and seminary, and over the years, my visitation has really declined, mainly because I'm in a church setting that they insist on the elders doing the visitations unless the person is dying or dead. And so I'm really wanting to hear and pick up on any new approaches. and I know that from my own experiences, each one that you go to is going to be different and unique. So I just want to hear something new. I want to hear what others are doing and just incorporate it for myself. And I think Marcia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm here because I saw that Ben was going to be leading this workshop, and I experienced, perhaps like many of you, the best pastoral care that I received from the upper part of the church during my tenure as a pastor. So I also feel that there might be some new things I can learn.
And Marcia is now calling on me
Oh,
because I want to share with you why I decided to write that reflection paper on this topic. So when we're talking about
I'm going to be on
pastoral
Zoom for a few minutes.
care, I'm really talking about visitation ministry. So pastoral care is a huge, huge area. But in this workshop, I'm really trying to talk about visitation ministries. That is hospital visitation, homebound member visitation, emergency visitation, that kind of visitation. We all do pastoral care through our sermons. We do it if we're teaching a class. We do it in a potluck meal. We do pastoral care in so many different ways. But I really wanted to focus on the way in which it affects us in visitation ministry, because I began to see over the years of my ministry, which is now 58 years that I'm in, I'm only 59, but 58 years in ministry. And things have become so different. I was a minister in 3 different local congregations for a total of 20 years. They were very different. A very rural mountain church in Virginia, a small county seat church in Kentucky, and then a very large suburban church in Orange, California. Those were all very different in what they expected in visitation ministry. And I brought into that what I expected of myself in visitation ministry as well. So there are many forces that happen when we think about how we each look at what does it mean for us as a pastor, minister, to be involved in visitation ministries. So I did those 20 years in local church. Then I moved over to university ministry at Chapman University for 10 years. And during that time, I visited all over Northern California, all over Arizona, and all over Southern California for Chapman University. But I sat in a lot of offices of local pastors and had great conversations. I then moved on to St. Louis, where I worked for the National Benevolent Association, and I traveled all over the United States visiting local pastors and sat in many offices of local pastors. And then I moved to Northern California, you know that whole piece, where I visited just a few offices of local pastors and churches. And then I was retired, but I was working with a young adult ministry for MBA, which took me all over the United States, and I visited local pastors there as well. So I have over 50 years of sitting in the church offices of local pastors and hearing a little bit about the way in which they view their ministry and the way that they feel they can best serve local congregation in visitation. a few experiences impacted me significantly to think about this. I was working with a local congregation in Northern California, and I had the chair of the elders phone me, and they said, "You need to come out and talk to our pastor. Our pastor will not go visit anybody in the hospital." I went, "Oh." So number one, well, have you spoken to your pastor? I'm not going to be triangulated when you should be doing this to start with on your own. Well, we tried. Well, let's go back and try it again. If nothing works, then please call me back. Well, within 2 weeks, the person called back and said, well, the elders are at their wits' end. We have a longtime member in this church, family in this church, and the pastor just won't go visit in the hospital. So I said, okay, I'll phone the pastor and just be honest and have some frank conversation, which I did. Said, I really want to urge you to go and make a visit in the hospital at least once. So another week went by and the elder phoned me again and said, well, did you phone the pastor? Yes. Well, the pastor still has not gone to visit. So I said, okay, I will call one more time. And the pastor then told me, well, I did go to visit. I said, oh, well, tell me about that visit. And he said, well, I was worried I'd be bothering that person. So I went and stood at the door in the hospital room and I looked in to see how the person was. And I asked, how are you? And they told me they were good. And I said, well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And I left. That was the hospital visit of that person who told the elders, I did go and visit. I looked in on my church member. Well, he meant that literally, evidently. He looked in, did nothing more. That made me question, so what does it mean to people today in today's church? This was a little while ago, but more recently in today's church to do pastoral visitation. How is that done? How do people set their standards? How do they understand their schedules? And so I decided to do an interview with 10 local pastors all around the United States. Different size churches, rural, suburban, county seat, urban, African American, Korean, Hispanic, young, older, people who'd been in ministry for 10 years, people who'd been in ministry for 40 years, a great diversity of those people. And that was illuminating. It was fascinating. It was educational. It was scary. It was challenging as I saw what I was learning from that group of 10 people. Clearly, that's a very small number. So it doesn't represent everything, but it just gave me a broad view of the way in which ministers come to understand what their role is in visitation ministry. So I sent them before, as I did you, 5 questions for them to think about before I did the interview with them. And then we had great conversations, 30 minutes. Well, no, they were all an hour or more because they had so much to share. And then I took all of that and pulled it into reflection paper using the best learnings that I received. And so what I want to do today is to share some of those learnings with you. No judgment on anybody's role in which they see themselves. No judgment on whether my way was better than somebody else's way. But we may learn from one another. As some of you mentioned, maybe there will be some insights, maybe there will be some understandings about different ways of doing visitation ministry than we have been doing. So I want to just read from a little bit of the one paragraph. So the first question that I had asked you was, what practices did you learn about visitation ministry in seminary? What you said was very much like most people of those 10 people said. So here's what they said. The vast majority of interviewees received very little or no training in practical ministry like visitation ministry. It was mostly what they got in seminary might have been a course in psychology or pastoral care that was more about family systems. What they did say was if they took CPE, they got huge learning from their clinical pastoral education experiences. Now, the work you do in a hospital or a setting like that has a very different schedule than as a local pastor. But there are practices that you learn in CPE, and most of them felt like that was the best training that they got in visitation ministry, especially in hospital visitation. The second question that I asked and you received, what did you learn from your own minister in the way in which to do pastoral ministry? Here's what they said. Many of them said that by observing their home church minister, the one in which they grew up, and even more in their internships in seminary. Now, for some of us, internships in seminary were 132 years ago. So just a little while ago, but still some of those things were ingrained in us as we watched what the pastor, senior minister, or other ministers in our internship, what we learned from them. So they said, yes, many of the interns, as they were interns, many of their pastors would take them on pastoral visitations to the hospital, sometimes in an emergency, often to visit the homebound of the congregation. And they learned a great deal from those visitations, or they learned some things that maybe they shouldn't do when they were visiting, and they were learning from their home minister or from their supervisor in their internships. So those are two of the questions and a little bit of what I got from the 10 people there. So now let's just open it up, and we're going to take about 15 minutes just for the group to share as they would like, reminding you that others might want to share. So I wonder, is there something about the way that you do visitation ministry, homebound, hospital, emergency ministries that you learned in seminary or that you learned from a supervisor or your home pastor? What did you learn to get you where you are today? Go, Ellie.
I'll start. I didn't go to seminary, but
Yeah, but
when I read this question, my thoughts went, first of all, I grew up in a very small town farming community, and our minister, Brother Todd, didn't have a car. And so he rode with the county agent and went to all the farmers all along the way. So he got to know those farmers before there was a crisis. And so that I carried that over to when I became a teacher. I called every one of my students' parents within the first 2 weeks of school so they'd know me as a person, so that if there was a problem, either on their end or my end, and I called, we had already laid some groundwork. So I think I would say laying groundwork helps. Go before you need to.
Somebody else. Yes, go, Marcia.
I think one of the most helpful things I ever learned in seminary, I took a class with Howard Kleinbell,
Mhm.
and he had a listening workshop, and he taught us listening skills. And one of the things I've been really noticing recently in our society is that people really want to talk, and very few people really want to listen. And when you are listened to, you feel like somebody cares, like that you connected with them and identified with them. But those listening skills were incredibly valuable.
I'm going to jump in right here, Marcia, because you just stole a major point of those 10 people. Good for you. You get a star right now because they said number one in any visitation ministry. Number one, listen, 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 listen. Did you get the point?
I
This
think maybe I
means
did.
you did. And then they said, this means visitation pastoral ministry is not about me. Be there, be present, be positive, be a hopeful, and I love this, spiritual, non-anxious presence. I worked with a group of chaplains at the NBA. We coined that and called it SNAP, spiritual, non-anxious presence, S-N-A-P, SNAP. And we tried to say, as we learned with those chaplains who were visiting people in a home, in a hospital, that before they ever went in, that the first thing they would do is they would do this literally to remind themselves, snap, I am here to be a spiritual, non-anxious presence. I love that.
Yeah, I do too.
I love that. They said they'd always do that when they're going in for an emergency visit, automobile accident, word of a cancer diagnosis, and then someone has called and said, could you go visit, or would you come visit my wife or my husband or family? They said they began to learn to put into their mind, snap, I want to enter this with a spiritual, non-anxious presence. So thank you, Marcia. Gold star. Anybody else want to add something? We still have time about anything you learned in from somebody else. Larry, you're about to speak.
I went to Northwest Christian College, and we had a class on pastoral care. Dr. George Shoemaker thought it was called Colloquium in the Practice of Ministry. Big name, fancy name for it, but I don't remember what I learned there. But when I became the minister in training at Garfield Park Christian Church in Santa Cruz with Gary Wells, Gary suggested that I read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And one of the things I learned from that book is that when you show genuine interest in people and want to hear their story, they respond to that. So it is still kind of the listening thing. And I spent a lot of time when I was at Garfield Park, even before I was minister in training there, was in the church for a year before they hired me. I was spending every Thursday afternoon, which I had as a day off, going and visiting 5 or 6 different people in convalescent hospitals. And then once they hired me, I did a lot of visiting of the seniors. Garfield Park Village CCH facility was just a couple of blocks from the church, so I visited a lot of people there. And basically, all through my ministry, it has just been listening to people's stories.
You know, one of the things I realized through this process is that in seminary, it was drilled into our heads by the dean of Bright Divinity School, Jim Suggs, who said that when you walk into a hospital room, you are ushering in the presence of God. And so it is integral that you go and usher in the presence of God. Now, as I look back, I'm not sure I totally agree. I'm sorry, Dr. Suggs, wherever you are with that theology. I think now it's more about helping people to discern the presence of God that was already there with them, as opposed to me walking it in. But he was very much from the school that as a minister, you are walking in the presence of God.
Well, there's an hour conversation, but we won't go there right now.
We won't go there, no.
But a good conversation. Yes. So anybody else want to say something about that?
I will.
Yeah, go.
My entering into seminary was after being in 2 other vocations for a while. One as a nurse, and the other one is in counseling psychology or clinical psychology. And so both of those have prepared me for a seminary, you know, and once there, our pastoral and care counseling professor, Dr. Archie Smith, was also a psychologist. So one of the things that we really learned about is how to actually listen. And I think somebody else has mentioned that already, that their listening is very important. But you know, one of the things that I think my nursing training has helped me to do is how to be present, because as individuals are going through things, sometimes you don't have to say anything. Just being present with the individual is just as soothing and just as comforting as best. That's the best medicine that is available. That somebody is there. And I take away from that was people do not care how much you know. What they care is about how much you care. And I have used that from my seminary days straight on through to where I am at now with our ministry team. And Monica and I share a congregation that has flipped. Flipped, what I mean is flip, it means that we are basically dealing with a congregation that are aging men and women with multiple health challenges. And so how do you provide the care and comfort there? And what we have found is that many of members in our congregation, yes, they like to talk, but they really just want someone to be present and to listen. And those things are, I think, what sustains me even in this journey that we are on now, home-wise.
I think we have time for one more if you'd like to share.
I was going to say, can you hear me?
Yes, Eva.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Probably the greatest experience that I had was when I went through Stephen ministry training. And the greatest thing I got from that was in visitation with terminal cancer patients, that I was a non-threatening presence. They could let themselves go because they were so worried about even crying or expressing what they were going through or feeling because they didn't want their family and friends to feel bad. So they always tried to be the strong one in the bunch when people would visit. And with me, I was a non-connected, you might say, but yet still connected, of course, presence. And they felt that they could cry in front of me. We did a lot of crying. I got yelled at because they were so angry about this disease that was robbing them of things. But yet I wasn't finger pointing, so I was non-threatening of saying, well, didn't you know or listen to the ads about smoking and what smoking and drinking can do to you? You know, there wasn't any of that. And so again, just like Leon was saying and others, the greatest thing was just when I showed up at that door, then they knew, you know, if I didn't show up, then they were like, oh, well, who wants to go and visit a dying person? But when I showed up and showed up on time, not early, because they probably wouldn't have been ready and they would have been mad at me because they didn't have their hair on straight or something like that. And they didn't need to have that anxiety and stress. But just coming in and just sitting down. But I think the other thing was, again, was just like, I think it was Leon, who was the nurse. One of the first things in CPE that I learned is that you don't walk in and say, well, how are we doing today? And, you know, every now and then they're going to tell you, well, I wouldn't be here if I was fine. So don't ask me how I'm doing, you know, so don't be stupid. You know, but just be a presence and let them know that you're willing to listen and that you don't have all the answers, but you just want to be there for them. Is there anything you would like to talk about, or just let's say prayer, or let's just have a moment of silence together? So the CPE and the Stephen Ministry were the greatest experiences for me.
So thank you to each of you. I hope as people were sharing, you grabbed a few nuggets of wisdom from experiences. As I said, to my awareness, there's not any experts in this group, but we bring experience, and that experience is so valuable. People who are just entering seminary may not bring any of that experience at all. And so as we have an opportunity to work with elders in our church, to work with other members of our church, we can give them some nuggets if they're going to be part of the visitation ministry of the church beyond us, which I think is so vital, that we do help others in our congregation to think about, oh, I'm afraid to go visit in the hospital. Well, take them with you 2 or 3 times. Oh, I don't know what to do when I go to visit someone who is homebound. Take them with you so they can get a little bit of mentoring from your experience. So I want to move us on. The question number 3 that you were asked is, what are the guidelines that you have adopted today for your visitation ministries? This is a broad question, because if we're talking about hospital calling, how often do you go to visit the same person in the hospital? Do you go to visit them and be with them before they go into surgery? Do you stay with them and the family through the surgery? Do you not go at the beginning, but after the surgery and they're back in their room, do you go then to visit? Do you send other people from the church to visit? There are many things to be understood when you're thinking about hospital ministry visitation. If you are the pastor, or as an Ellie, you're the minister for seniors, and so you have people in the hospital. So those are just a few of that area for us to think about. Then you have homebound members? How often do you, as the pastor, go to visit a homebound member? Is there a schedule in which you and or the elders or other members of the church go to visit homebound members? If you go, do you take communion? Or is that the job of somebody else in the church? Or has that just been abandoned and nobody does it? So you can see it's a broader kind of question as you think about it. And if you go with communion, do you ever take an elder or a member of the diaconate with you so that they are also learning how to do that kind of visitation, which is a gift, especially for older members, especially for people who are lifelong disciples? I've got to have communion. I need communion and I can't get to church. Please bring me communion. So how do we manage all of those different pieces of home visitation? And what have you learned over the years about doing that? So I want to come back and share a few things from the reflection of those 10 ministers, and then we'll talk about that as a group a little bit.
Ben, can I
Yes.
ask a quick question?
You
Were,
may.
the- were these reflections done pre-COVID or post?
Yeah, really.
Well, the next question, well, I was getting to that, but I'll go to
Oh, so,
now.
I'm sorry.
No, you were right on. So as I called it, there is BC and AD, before COVID and after COVID. And so things altered hugely as COVID hit. And there's a way in which people were making an effort to do visits. I often found congregations sometimes did it better during COVID because they could make a phone call or they could send an email and the person felt like they were being cared for. Oops, I just lost everybody. Okay.
We see you.
Yeah. Because people felt like they were being cared for or they got cards. And then when COVID was ending and we were going back to kind of the way things had been before, the church forgot those people. Nobody sent cards, or few people sent cards, fewer people made phone calls, fewer people sent emails. And so the people who during COVID had felt so cared for now suddenly went, what happened? The church has forgotten about me now. So that's another whole piece of, is there a schedule? Is there a format in which a church cares for its homebound members? Is that built into the structure of the elders or the diaconate? Is it built into your structure as the pastor? How does that work? And what's the way in which you have decided to do that? So there was all 10 of them talked about before COVID and after COVID. And one of the things that they said especially was they would check in with a family member to ask, is it in a place right now where I could go visit at all? If they're in a nursing home, could I visit? Or could I even get a phone call into them? So they were using the family members as a conduit to understand better the way in which they could do their pastoral visitation ministry. That then went over into after COVID. And so what they were sharing, many of them would say, okay, your mom's going in for surgery. She's very nervous. I want you to tell me, as the daughter or the son, what will you ask your mom what she wants? Does she want somebody from the church? Does she want the pastor? Does she want an elder? Does she want somebody there before surgery? Or is that necessary for her? Because what they learned was church members will often say, well, I don't want to bother the pastor. The pastor is so busy that I don't want to bother them to ask them to come and be with me. But mom could give you the answer, or the son could give you the answer, or the brother or the sister could get the answer from their family member without saying, and I'm learning this for the pastor. They could say, well, mom, you're going into the hospital, you're going to have surgery. How do you feel about the minister coming to have prayer with you before you go into surgery? Or how do you feel about having an elder come? What would you most like? What do you need? That was a great learning for me, that because they learned that after COVID, that when they couldn't go, then they didn't know whether to go or not, which left the church member who was homebound or going in for surgery kind of feeling like, well, I can't phone the minister and say, I want you to visit me. They didn't feel like they could do that. So they set up a system. If they learned somebody was going to the hospital, that's the way they did it. They asked, unless the member would say, here's what I'm hoping you'll do, which not a lot of members do. They will blame you because you didn't show up, but you might not even have known they were in the hospital.
Exactly.
That happens sometimes. So I thank you, Janet. That was coming, but we'll go right there now. A couple of other things they learned was this. Always assure people in your visit that there is confidentiality. Eva, you in a way mentioned that because there were things they could do with somebody else they couldn't do with their family because they would upset them. But assuring people that you are there and you are the only one that they're telling this story to. You are the only one. Then you may say, you know, that's so important. Is it all right if I share that with your son or your daughter or your mom or your dad? Is it all right to do that? But for them to know it is wide open. They are safe to share whatever they would like. Some other things that they learned, medical appointments. Sorry, Marcia. I hope it's not yours. Is it your medical? Okay, sorry. You go take care of you. We send you forth with our prayers. So another thing that I found very interesting, because this was a group of people from everywhere, all over the United States, especially if you're going into a new setting. And I don't know that any of you are much in a new setting. Although, Larry, if you were to go in and do an interim, that might be a new setting, even if you knew some of the people in the congregation. What are the expectations of the pastor for visitation? What does the congregation expect? If you follow a pastor who showed up every day at the hospital, you need to know that. Because if you don't figure out a way to manage that situation, you will be a neglectful pastor because you're not showing up every day. That might not be your pattern for visitation ministry, but it is the congregation's expectation. Certainly, somebody in most cases who is 25 and going in the hospital doesn't have the same pastoral expectations as somebody who is 85 who's going into the hospital. Older members in general, obviously these are all in generalities, in general have a greater expectation for a pastor or a church member to visit. That's built into their DNA of way the church was. 25-year-olds would think, if you send me a text and let me know you're thinking of me, that's fine. That's all I need. I don't need more than that. Now, that's again general, but knowing your specific situation, again, this may or may not be true, but if you're in the Bay Area, in a more urban, suburban area, there may not be the same expectations of you to visit as if you're in the valley, which is a far more rural setting, and therefore the expectations in many rural settings is for far more one-on-one visitation. So they kept saying, know the expectations of the congregation that you are in, and then you can help to manage that if you think very differently about this. You may alter some of what you've been thinking, but you may help the congregation to be realistic about what a minister can or cannot do. Also, if you're in certain settings, doesn't matter, rural or suburban or urban, to get to the hospital to make a visit may be an hour's drive or more. And if you have 3 members in the hospital at the same time, and they're all in different hospitals, you're talking about a lot of time, important value, but help manage that, because it's easy to say, I'm going to visit Mary at this hospital. Tomorrow, I'm going to visit Jim at this hospital. So the congregation knows you're not ignoring them, but it could be a 4-hour adventure to go make that visit for one person. And oh, by the way, I have a sermon to get ready. And oh, by the way, I'm preparing a Bible study lesson. And oh, by the way, we have 3 committee meetings tomorrow night. And you know what your schedule is, but let people know what you're doing. A memory from my church years ago in Orange, a dear lady was in a convalescent home. Every time anybody would go to visit, she would start out by saying, oh, I am so glad to see somebody from the church. Nobody ever comes to visit me. Now, as the pastor, I knew an elder had been there 2 days before. Somebody else had been there earlier in the week. So we found a way to deal with that. We got a guest book and put it in her room. And everybody who visited from the church signed the guest book with the date. So when we went to visit, we could walk in, we could go first after greeting, we could go to the guest book. Then we can say, oh, this is great. I see that so-and-so visited you yesterday. That's, oh, and the elder brought communion 3 or 4 days ago. It may be that that person just didn't remember, and that's reasonable. But there is a way to manage that so that the congregation knows, no, we're not ignoring people. We're showing up. As the pastor, we're showing up. Couple more things to share that they offered too. So one of these people, younger, said every morning they look at Facebook because many of their members are on Facebook, especially older. If you have all younger members, you need to look up Instagram. You need to change some of where you're going with that. But they would look at that and just scan through their members to see if anybody had posted so-and-so went into the hospital last night. So-and-so, blah, blah, blah. They were updates that they got on Facebook or Instagram or somewhere that was really valuable for them. And then they could then phone a family member and figure out what they needed to do. But otherwise, ministers are sometimes the last person to know. I've always believed if I learn about somebody who's in the hospital, in a church that wasn't mine, I would phone that minister and say, "Do you know?" Now, maybe they knew, and maybe they knew 5 times over, but I'd rather know 5 times over than not know at all. And somebody go to the hospital and die. And then they would say, "Well, our church didn't care about us. They never showed up." Another thing that I found very useful was that when a member would join the church, as they filled out some information cards, there was a section in that about visitation ministry. If you go into the hospital, what would you like? If your mother comes to visit you and becomes ill while she's there, they gave a number of menu options that the person could fill out. Then you wouldn't know that about a new member if you didn't gather that information when they first join the church or they first start coming. They may never join, but they may be regular in attendance. So having some kind of form like that, this person used and said it was so useful for them. Another thing that I found very useful, and I'm just going to read this. One pastor observed that they have quite a few members who have been spiritually bruised, battered, and beaten by the organized church. In some cases, they were bruised, battered, and beaten by an ordained minister. That was often persons who were from the LGBTQ community who had been bruised, battered, and beaten. It also could be racial. It also could be ethnic. It also could be language. So it could be a variety of things. What this pastor said was they found that rather than them go to visit near the beginning, they would ask somebody from that community to go and make initial visits, because the person who'd been bruised by the church did not find a pastor coming to visit to be that comfortable. So sending somebody who has a camaraderie, a commonality with that person was very useful. I thought that was a great insight from somebody. Another thing that a person said was, I always try to ask, is it all right if I take your hand? Some people like to be touched and it's very meaningful. Other people do not. And we should always ask, is it all right? I would love to take your hand and I'd love to offer a prayer. Is it all right if I take your hand? Would you like a prayer? Asking people if they would like a prayer opens the door for people, again, who've been spiritually bruised, battered, or beaten, to say, I'm not very comfortable with prayer, because they were prayed for to have the demon thrown out of them. And so when they think of prayer, they don't think of comfort, they think of judgment. So those were some very useful things that I found in the 10 ministers that I interviewed. Okay, we're going to go to you now for a few minutes here. So as you think about the way in which you have organized your visitation ministries, hospital, homebound, emergency, is there a way that you have done that and it's different now, that whatever that difference is? Or are you doing the same thing you've done for 30 years or 20 years? I can tell you, if I was a local pastor, I would probably do it almost the same way that I did it before, because I found it very useful for me in knowing my members, but also I would need to think about it differently, because church today is not the same. So, what are things that you have learned and maybe are different in the way that you do it now?
Ben, you brought up a lot of things in that
Oh, I know I did.
in that little synopsis there. But what I would say that it's totally different the way that, and I share with this with Monica. So but it's totally different the way Monica and I do this now. Again, our congregation is definitely homebound. We use Zoom as our church setting. And we do not know sometimes when individuals are not feeling well or had went into the hospital and or someone relative had passed away. And we don't learn that to after the fact. And so, and once we have conversations with the community to try to figure out how best can we serve you, we don't really get an answer. It's basically said that I like it the way that it is. Okay, but what does that mean? So one of the ways that I think that we work this out so we don't really burn ourselves out as the pastors of the church is we try to cut things geographically. Individuals who are closer to Monica, she will take care of, and individuals who are closer to me as far as geographical locations, I will, and then we crisscross one another. We share observations or notes with one another. Every member of our church is aware that if I go visit Jonathan, I'm coming visiting you today, but is it okay that I share with Monica that I paid a visit with you today? And she does, is vice versa that way. I think that has helped us as far as in caring for our congregation. But it's a challenge. It's a big challenge, especially we started this year mainly after COVID. Prior to COVID, we had a facility, we can come to meet and things of that nature. It was very few who could not make it to church. And that was easy to manage. Post-COVID, it's a whole different ballpark. And it's a whole different skill sets we have to learn and how to incorporate that into an already heavy schedule that we had, but now we had to come up with new ways of doing it and to really encourage members of the congregation to talk or to share, even by being present, can sense that, okay, you really, really want to talk about something. So let's do that. And we've been very careful not to have members of our congregation feel as though they are neglected, that no one cares or no one's been there. Especially the two ministers. And so it's, oh, wow, it's a roller coaster ride. And it's miraculously that we're able to handle it as best as we possibly can.
Well, it sounds like you have a system, which is very important.
Yeah.
If it's all hit and miss, then you're always going to miss.
Yes.
Yeah. So somebody else, can you think of the way you're doing it now that's different than you used to? Or have you heard some things that go, oh, well, maybe I could try that? Ellie?
When I started this position 10 years ago, I thought I had to do it all by myself.
Mhm.
Now I learned to listen, like one gentleman that's been homebound. There's this person, Janet, that always makes him laugh. And I'll call her and say, Ken needs a laugh, Janet. When or another person that makes beautiful handmade cards. I said, if you get a chance this week, could you send a card to Bev? Or, so I've learned to tune. And then it's neat because then these people get more involved personally. And so they automatically have more people looking after. So I guess the bottom line is don't feel like you have to do it all yourself. Be open to incorporating other people.
Well, Ellie, I would like for you to come visit me. Could you do that tomorrow, please?
Okay. Could you meet me halfway?
Sure. Somebody else, what have you been learning or unlearning about the way in which you do visitation ministry? You're all stuck, I can see.
I think that I have transitioned. Certainly COVID shifted how I perceived ministry, and I probably do more phone calls now than I actually did showing up. Because unfortunately, though we're past the worst of COVID, we still have outbreaks. And people are just having what the mild COVID. It's like the flu, but it's so daggum contagious. It's almost worse than the cold. And so there is a sensitivity to that. But I think that I have redeemed my perception to the value of phone calls and notes and cards. I kind of used to discount those as just not as good. That's just not a good thing. It's not as good as actually showing up. But I'm beginning to think differently about that.
Were you done, Janet?
Yes.
It's been really interesting. Initially, I was in a somewhat more conservative theological experience. I'll put it that way. More evangelical, Pat Robertson type of listening. The blessing in being, for me, being in this region is if you listen differently, you listen deeper. Your listening is much more inclusive, I could say, where when you talk about diversity and things like that, it's not a matter of well, you're sick and you're lame. No, it's a matter of listening differently because the diversity of the community. It's interesting. So going around a different region, as you well know, Ben, is like you have different communities and different experiences of listening, and sometimes a different depth of listening, which it's really fascinating to go throughout the region and hear differently. It's the listening to how people use their words, how they use their nonverbal things. Right. Okay. And somebody, I'll go back to Leon. I say, yeah. And then, yeah, I mean, he's seen it all. So it's cool to go back. Hey, Pastor Leon, what do you think about this? But that experience is just that different listening in different communities, how that works. Yeah.
I want to share a couple things about expectations of racial ethnic communities. Now, 10 people, there's no way any of them could represent a whole community. So I'm only sharing what they shared from their experience of their community. So African-American pastors told me this, and then Monica and Leon, you can tell me if they got it all wrong, okay? They said, for the African-American community church, hospital visits are a must. It should be a priority for the pastor. The visits do not need to be long, but they need to happen. And it's a good idea to take another elder or church member with you to be a listening ear, an extra representative of the church. Because if you are the pastor and you're going to visit, you're not just representing you, you are representing the whole church community. And in your visits, even if you're alone, you should be stating that you are bringing love and care from their congregation. That means a lot to people. Hispanic community. If a member or a member's family calls asking me to go, I go immediately. Immediately. Some members are far more private and they don't want an in-person visit, or they are fine with just a phone call. But whoever phoned you to say, would you go visit mom in the hospital? Find out from them what that person might be most comfortable with. And always, always ask if they would like a prayer. Korean community. Older first generation church members expect, they made that double strong, expect a visit at least 2 times a year. Doesn't matter if you're homebound, doesn't matter what. They expect to visit 2 times a year. And then they told me something I'd never known before. But this is a little bit sensitive because there are older Korean members who believe if the pastor comes to visit, they are obligated to give them money. That's part of what is expected if they visit. A member in the hospital expects a visit before surgery and follow-up visits. And taking communion to the hospital is very important. Now, again, that's kind of generalized from a few people who do not represent a whole racial or ethnic community, but these are all longtime disciples. And so they were sharing what their experience had been in their congregations, and they all had served several congregations. So just a little bit of extra learning for me. So if you want to put in your newsletter, if you want me to come visit as your pastor, I will expect an offering be given to me when that visit happens. No, don't do that. So I want to just ask if there's anything else somebody would like to share. And I have a closing story I would like to share.
Ben, you was absolutely accurate in your statements about African American communities and families, especially dealing with our elder members of the community. That is sort of like as an unwritten requirement. If the members are in the church, or even if the member's not in the church, if a member of the church lets you know that my friend or my neighbor is in the hospital, and I would like, would you go and visit? You know, it's not a suggestion. That's almost like you need to go and visit. And I'm talking from experience from being in a AME Zion church, a Baptist church, and now a Disciples church, but that is a requirement, and they will never forget if you did not visit. The time and how long you stay is not important. The fact that you showed up is the important part. And then asking or providing a prayer is, again, dependent upon the age level of the individual. Some of it is like, okay, it's required for you to provide prayer for my loved one. But if it's a younger person, it may not. It may be just being there, just having a conversation, listening, and hearing a person talk, but you showed up. That was the most important part.
Well, I will let the people that gave me that information, Leon, I'll let them know they were right on.
Yeah.
According to Leon.
Ben, I'm curious. I've usually felt more comfortable visiting the older folk in the church, but uneasy about the younger families, because I've sometimes worried that they're going, oh my gosh, gotta clean up the house before the comes. Kind of thing, is there um, eh, some thoughts? And I'm curious about the 25-year-old in the hospital. You give them a call and ask if they'd like to stop by. It's probably better than just showing up.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, I think that's a good insight, Larry. It's often for someone in that situation. Now, if the person is very critically ill, say the 25-year-old has been in an automobile accident, they may not be able to manage the phone. So the family would be the vehicle to help you know. If they are, then I think phoning is, say, I'd like to drop by. When is a good time to do that? And they may say you don't need to. And then you can wait and see kind of how that is lived out, because you may want to try another day if they're going to be there for very long. I think visiting younger families, that you're very right. If if it's a single mom with two kids, a visit may not be very easy to manage. So one of the ways that I've found to do that is to phone and say, I know you're very busy. I'm right now at the donut shop or the grocery store. I would love to drop by some donuts, or I'd like to bring you some fruit. Can I just drop by for a few minutes and leave this with you? So you're not asking them to do anything, but you're letting them know that you care about them.
um, Aaron Edwards, who was co-pastor with me for about my last year in Woodland. Of course, Aaron has never had a church building that she was located at with an office. And almost all of her pastoral care is done at coffee shops. She meets people at coffee shops and visits with them. I was quite intrigued with, and she does that a lot, but it seems to be, but sometimes it's a little tricky because coffee shops, you can kind of be packed together with a lot of people. But I'd seen her sitting with someone who was in tears, because of something going on in their life, sitting there in a coffee shop. So it seemed to work for Aaron.
I do think that is more and more true with a number of pastors, and especially younger pastors find that to be very comfortable. I think the other piece of that relates to our being sensitive to boundaries and being aware that more for males, but not only for males at all, but more for males, going to visit alone presents very different challenges than it might have 50 years ago, which doesn't mean it shouldn't have presented a challenge 50 years ago, because we know things were happening that did not make us proud to be the church. But it is important to understand what your safety is as the pastor, and what safety you're providing to the person you're going to visit as well. So that's another reason, if able, to take somebody with you. That's probably a good idea. It's probably very useful if you're going into their home, which is another reason for the I was going to say the Starbucks, because you're only allowed to do coffee visits if they're at a Starbucks. No other one works. That's the holy place to go. Not really, but so okay, couple of minutes. I want to tell you a brief story about a hospital visit that I did. This is years ago. A very inactive family, well, husband, wife, in my church in Lebanon, Kentucky. They owned the Western Auto Store. They were very well known in the community. They had moved there. They were disciples. They had joined the church. And then they were members of the church when I got there, but they never came to church at all. I went by their store one day and I heard from a worker that he was going to have surgery the next day and he'd already gone to the hospital. This is in the old days where you went to the hospital the night before when you were going to have surgery. Remember those old days? And so the hospital was almost 2-hour drive. So it wasn't in Lebanon, Kentucky, it was in Louisville, Kentucky. But I got up and went to visit. And when I got there, he'd had the surgery. He and his wife were there. He was not critical surgery, but he was awake. And I walked in and they said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm your pastor and I wanted to visit and see how you are and see if there's anything that I can do." We had a wonderful visit, not long, had prayer. I left. 2 weeks later, Sunday morning, they showed up at church. From that visit, they became as regular as anybody could be in church. They became generous givers. They invited people who came into their store to come to church. And for years, people had said, "Oh, they will never come to church. Don't waste your time visiting them." I didn't visit them in their home. I went to the hospital. I just showed up. You've heard that line or that phrase a couple of times, show up. So for me, that's one of the greatest learnings about this kind of ministry, whether it's phone, whether it's another way, whether it's in person, showing up is one of the most important things you can do. Not just because you represent God, but because you remind people that they are already part of God's beloved community. So, Monica, I thank you for coordinating this and inviting me to do this. And I thank everybody for showing up. And I will be glad to close this in a moment of prayer.
And thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Ben, and to all of you who shared that this has been very insightful for me. I just appreciate it a lot.
Well, Larry, you're just beginning, but you'll get your act together eventually.
Yeah, it's true.
So let's pray. Our loving and gracious and giving and forgiving and ever-present God, for all the ways that we learn from each other, for all the ways in which we learn from you, for all the ways in which we open our minds and our hearts and our spirits to grow. All of this, we give you our thanks. Now lead us into the kind of best ministry possible that we can provide for those that we love and care for. In the name of Jesus, who is our brother and our friend. Amen.